Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today. Welcome to NACTO's public webinar series and today's event with senior researcher Charles Brown, titled Cycling Equity, Barriers to Bike Access and Use in Communities of Color. My name is Corinne Kistner, I'm the Director of Programs here at NACTO, and I will be moderating today's webinar. First, some quick logistics. So you know, we're planning on leaving about 20 minutes at the end for questions. You'll see a question box in your on-screen control panel. Please type in your questions as you think of them, and we'll get through as many as possible at the end of the webinar. We'll also be releasing the recording and slides from this webinar on our website in the next few days, so keep an eye out for that. NACTO is also hosting webinars like this on an ongoing basis, so check in on our website, nacto.org, and on Facebook and Twitter as well for information about upcoming webinars. For those of you who are new to NACTO, we're the National Association of City Transportation Officials. We're a coalition of 55 city transportation and transit agencies across North America, and our goal is to build cities as places for people with safe, sustainable, accessible, and equitable transportation choices that support a strong economy and a vibrant quality of life. We do this largely through knowledge transfer, bringing together city transportation departments to learn from each other, helping cities develop city-focused design standards that meet urban needs and conditions, and through events like this webinar, providing a platform for leading voices in transportation. A few quick NACTO plugs before we begin. Today is the last day to register at the early bird discounted rate for our Designing Cities conference, which is in Chicago from October 30th to November 2nd. We hope to see you all there. And Friday is the application deadline for a fabulous job opening here at NACTO, the program manager for our bike share and city recycling programs. So if you're interested, please find that posting on the careers page of our website and be sure to get in your application by Friday. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Charles Brown. Mr. Brown is a senior researcher with the Allen and Voorhees Transportation Center and an adjunct professor at the Edward J. Blouson School of Planning and Public Policy, both at Rutgers University. He has 15 years of public and private sector experience in transportation planning, policy, and research. He's considered a national thought leader and a leading voice in encouraging social equity in active transportation. He served as an instructor for 12 deliveries of the New Jersey Department of Transportation Complete Streets course and trained chronic disease coordinators throughout New Jersey on behalf of the New Jersey Department of Health. He currently serves as an instructor of a course on advanced environmental justice for the National Transit Institute and Federal Transit Administration, and is part of a course faculty at the Walkability Action Institute funded by the CDC. Today, Charles will be discussing his cutting-edge research on a topic that needs and deserves attention. While we know that a lack of infrastructure is a huge barrier to biking, we as transportation planners need to look across disciplines and policy sectors to see what else stops people from riding. We need to understand those barriers, and we need to integrate that knowledge into our work. So we're thrilled to have Charles Brown here with us today to discuss his research on barriers to cycling access and use in Black and Hispanic communities. Without further ado, Charles.
Good evening, good morning to some of you, and good afternoon to those who are joining me on the East Coast. As was previously stated, today I'm going to talk about cycling equity, barriers to bicycle access and use in New Jersey, and in communities of color, I meant. Next, what I would like to do is acknowledge a few people that participated in this research with me. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge my co-author, James St. Clair, as well as Betsy Harvey, who assisted in survey development and outreach. We also had between 10 and 20 Rutgers University graduate students who worked on the project over the course of a year. Finally, I would like to thank the New Jersey Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration for funding this project. There is one disclaimer I would like to offer. If you've seen this presentation previously, it has since been updated to include and compare the responses of white and Asian populations. The original presentation did not. In terms of the research purpose, question, and methodology, The purpose was to ascertain the barriers to and identify solutions to bicycle use among Blacks and Hispanics. We had three primary research questions. First and foremost was, why do Blacks and Hispanics choose not to bicycle? Secondly, what prevents current Blacks and Hispanics from choosing to bicycle more? And then thirdly, what can be done to encourage all of them to bicycle more often? Our methodology and data collection included a comprehensive literature review, 2 focus groups, of which participants were paid a $50 cash incentive and provided food and drinks for their attendance. We had a focus group with only Hispanic populations and one with a Black population as well. The Hispanic focus group was held entirely in Spanish, and that was conducted by my co-author, James Sinclair. We conducted intercept surveys in 34 different towns throughout New Jersey in the year, and we had 2 surveys that were given out. One survey was for bicyclists, and the other one was for non-bicyclists. And the way it worked was, if we approach you on the street somewhere within the 34 towns, and you stated that you had not bicycled within 12 months of our interaction, you were given a non-bicyclist survey. If you had bicycled within 12 months, you were given a bicyclist survey. And I'll briefly explain the differences between those surveys shortly. In terms of the respondents, the demographic characteristics of the survey respondents included 38% who identified as Black and African American, 32% who identified as Hispanic Latino, 16% white, 3% Asian, and 4% biracial. Persons in age group 18 to 24 years old made up the largest share of the respondents, and 54% of the respondents were males. The educational attainment of the respondents is lower than the population of New Jersey as a whole, but comparable to the population residing within the study area. That is the 34 towns where intercept surveys took place. The respondents are also poorer than the population within the study area and New Jersey as a whole. 80% of the households have 2 or more adults present, and 49% have no children present. More than 1/4 of the households reported not having bicycles present, and respondents reported having fewer motor vehicles available in their household than those in the study area and New Jersey as a whole. In terms of country of origin, we asked the respondents where did they spend the first 12 years of their lives to kind of get at immigrant versus non-immigrant populations. And what we found was nearly 1 in 4 of all respondents spent their formative years outside the U.S. When you consider the population who identified as persons of color, that percentage jumps to nearly 40% of the survey respondents. Now what I want to share with you briefly, going back to the 2 surveys that were distributed. We had 1 for bicyclists and 1 for what we call non-bicyclists. The questions that were unique to the bicyclist survey touched on things such as bicycle frequency, reasons for bicycling, safe places to bicycle to and from home, and membership in a bicycle club. What we found when we asked why do they bicycle, the majority of the respondents stated that they bicycle to be healthier and to have fun. When we asked where can you safely bicycle to and from your home, nearly 1 in 4 felt that they can safely bicycle to local parks or trails from their home. Next, when we asked about bicycle club membership, the majority, 93%, stated that they are not active in bicycle clubs and organizations. And if there are any other fellow researchers on the call or the webinar, it would be interesting to sort of get at what's the reason for this, where nearly 93% of the participants are not active in bicycle clubs and organizations. Now, in terms of the questions that were unique to the bicyclist survey, the questions here focus on bicycle ability and interest. We looked at negative bicycle experiences as well as reasons for choosing not to bicycle. When it comes to ability and interest, what we found is that the majority actually do know how to bicycle. They just had not bicycled within 12 months of receiving our survey. But of those who could not bicycle, at least 16% stated that they were interested. And we found that more women and Hispanic respondents are interested in learning than their counterparts. When we looked at their reasons for not cycling, more than 1/4 or 28% stated that they are not cycling because they currently do not own a bicycle, and a significant proportion of them, 11%, also stated that they don't feel safe or are not interested in bicycling as well. When it came to negative bicycle experiences, more than 1/4 reported having had a negative bicycle experience, and a sizable minority stated that this also limits how often they choose to bicycle. Black non-bicyclists do not bicycle due to disabilities, physical limitations, not owning a bicycle, and also not having a safe place to bicycle, more so than their counterparts, is what we found. Now on to questions identical in both surveys. These questions touch on things such as police harassment, fear, cost and maintenance of bicycle, their perceived access to political power, and etc. The first question we got at was, are bicycles too expensive to purchase and maintain? And what we found is that more than 1/4 of all respondents felt that a bicycle was too expensive to purchase or to maintain. Black respondents and those earning less than the state median household income in New Jersey, which is around 70-something thousand, were more likely to agree with this statement than their counterparts. When we asked about the regional bike share programs, such as the City Bike in New York City and Indigo in Philadelphia, we asked them if they were aware of these programs. Nearly 54% of the majority stated they were not aware of either program. The reason we asked this program, one, we wanted to currently see how aware people were of the two programs at the time, because we knew that almost regardless of where you live within New Jersey, you are within 1 hour of either of these programs, and many of our respondents commute to these cities for work. When it came to awareness, we asked them if they were to have the ability to use a program, how many of them would show interest in it. What we found is that 85% of the respondents stated that they would actually use bike share if it was available. A higher proportion of female and Hispanic respondents, as you can see, showed more interest than their counterparts. And also, when we asked about who bicycled, we wanted to get at sort of perception. Like, who do they think were bicycling? Is it the rich? Is it middle class? Or is it the poor? And what we found here is that the majority of all respondents, 60%, believe that bicycling is done by the middle class. However, more than 1/4 also believe that it is done by the poor. Next, we wanted to get at issues around access to political power. Here is a typical minority neighborhood in New Jersey, and what you can see is, or you can notice, the lack of quality infrastructure, including bicycle lanes, sidewalk, benches, trees, pedestrian scale lighting, and property maintenance. We asked them, do they believe that it is likely or unlikely that government will bring about the changes that they would like to see in the community, such as the rendering that you're seeing here? And 56% of all respondents believe that it's actually unlikely that government would bring forth those changes. What I want you to quickly recognize here, though, is that in looking at this rendering, this was done as part of a graduate studio that I teach at Rutgers, looking at complete streets in Newark. And it was, you can notice that the students working with the community, kept in the people from a demographic standpoint who actually live in that community. This was important considering the black male that is shown here, because this part of Newark is a black community. And the people wanted to make sure that when you do these renderings, that you bring about the changes, the infrastructure, the trees, the benches, etc., but you still see them in the before and the after pictures. We've all talked about the fear of gentrification in the bicycling context, and one way to sort of avoid this concern is for people to see themselves in such renderings. So I was extremely happy that my students were able to capture that, and that was brought to our attention as well. That is a sidebar that wasn't actually part of the presentation, but I mean part of the survey, but it is something that I think we should have a discussion about. Also, when it came to government support and investment, we asked them how many of them think that government currently supports and invests in bicycle infrastructure in their community. And what we found is that the majority of all respondents do not feel that government supports and invests in cycling. A higher proportion of males, Asians, and households earning $250,000 or more were much more optimistic than their counterparts. Next, when it comes to bicycle lanes, we asked them how many of them would like a bicycle lane on their street. And what we found is that nearly 8 out of every 10 respondents stated that they would like a bicycle lane on their street. The additional bicycle lanes were favored more by Hispanic respondents and those earning between $150,000 and $250,000 annually. Next, when it came to bicycle storage, we asked how many of them had a safe place to store their bicycle. And what we found is that less than 1 out of every 4 non-bicyclists reported having a safe place to store their bicycle, versus 9 out of 10 bicyclists. We were also able to see that a higher proportion of Hispanic and male respondents reporting having storage than their counterpart. When it came to another barrier, which is bicycle theft, we noticed that 1/3 of all the respondents reported being a victim of bicycle theft, but males, 43% of male reported being victims, which means that males reported being victimized more than twice as much as females in terms of bicycle theft. Also, of the 1/3 of the respondents who reported being victims of bicycle theft, many of them stated being victims of bicycle theft not once but several times over. What about child safety? Well, we wanted to know how many of them felt that their children are safe from traffic when bicycling in their communities, to sort of get at this generational or cultural fear. And what we found is that the majority of all of them, 54%, do not feel that the children are safe from traffic when biking in their community. This viewpoint is highest among non-bicyclists, and that's regardless of race and ethnicity, but comparatively a higher proportion of females and Hispanics felt this way. What about professional bicycle training? We know there are many classes offered throughout the country. There are many programs devoted to serving the bicycle interests and needs of communities of color. But when we asked this question, how many of them had actually received that professional bicycle training, a majority, 90%, had not received the training. This was highest among Black respondents, females, and non-bicyclists. Then when it comes to issues around perceived police harassment, we asked how many of them had been unfairly stopped by a police officer. And more than 1 out of every 10 respondents, 13% of all respondents, reported being unfairly stopped by a police officer. Males reported being stopped at a rate 7 times that of females. Minorities as a whole reported being unfairly stopped at a higher rate than their white counterparts. When it comes to the actual barriers, we gave them a sort of a predetermined list of barriers based upon the literature that we've done. And what we found is that when it came to all respondents, fear of traffic collision was number 1, and fear of being robbed and assaulted while bicycling was number 2, and the pavement condition was number 3. This led me to put together an article focused on fear, which is a silent barrier to bicycling in Black and Hispanic communities. I think as a profession as a whole, transportation professionals and engineers, we tend to focus heavily on the actual infrastructure without thinking much about the social characteristics in communities. Um, it was very striking to find that many of the bicyclists were concerned about their personal safety while bicycling. And this was surprising considering that they're moving at a speed which is much higher than, let's say, if you're traveling by foot. So this is something that we definitely need to address as a whole, as a profession, to really get at beyond the infrastructure to kind of understand these cultural and social barriers that people have. In terms of the potential solutions, we gave them also, once again, a predetermined list of variables. And the number one thing that all respondents asked for is a bicycle lane between them and their destination. But number two was an off-street path as well between them and their destination, and secure bicycle parking, also ranked high. I'm sure you can understand that given the amount of respondents who stated that bicycle theft was an issue. And those things both rank 1 through 3, whether they were a bicyclist or a non-bicyclist, and there were a lot of similarities regardless of race and ethnicity as well. So many of you have asked sort of what's next. Now that we've done this research, we just completed part 2 of this research, which looks at barriers to bicycle access and use among minority women. We conducted, with help through the New Jersey Department of Transportation, 3 focus groups with Black and Hispanic women. They were in Newark, New Jersey, Camden, New Jersey, and New Brunswick, New Jersey, and we compared the perceptions of bicycling and the barriers to bicycle access and use among minority women between Blacks and Hispanic women and white women in Montclair, New Jersey, which is a suburban community, a first-ring suburban community in New Jersey. We're also, because we feel that this discussion needs to continue on and it needs to happen in a space where people can freely discuss what they feel about this sort of intersection of mobility, race, class, gender, and politics. I've been working with America Walks to release a new online discussion titled Walking Towards Justice. During this sort of online discussion, we're going to be using literature to kind of help contextualize these different discussions as they're happening. If you all are interested, please register today, and the information is shown here. Lastly, if you would like to contact me, here's my information. You can pick up the phone and call as well. I'm one of those people who actually answers this phone. So thank you for your time. I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Charles. We've got some questions coming in here, and I encourage anyone else who has questions about the research or the implications or how to integrate this into your own work to type those into the question box. But first, Charles, some clarifying questions. Could you just help us understand, we've got a few questions about the results and whether they are for the full sample or for Black and Hispanic groups compared with white groups. Just help everyone in the audience understand the differences that you found.
Yeah, so overall, what you just saw when I stated all respondents, that included Black, Hispanic, white, Asian. It included all respondents regardless of, inclusive of all races and ethnicities. The original research that was done or that was published to the public only included the results of Blacks and Hispanics. So what you're seeing today is the revised data that is inclusive of everyone.
Okay, great. And is there a place that that people can look at this data to understand how to compare some of the results across racial groups?
There is a place. We are in the final stages of formatting the document for public consumption, and that will probably be released sometime this month. They can find that at www.njbikeped.org. Once again, that's www.njbikeped.org. it'll be available there pretty soon.
Awesome. That's great. Can you tell us anything? We're getting some questions about the breakdown of fear as a factor by race. How disproportionately that is a barrier to Black and Hispanic communities as compared with white communities. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
Which part of the fear you're referring to? Is it the police harassment or being robbed and assaulted?
Let's talk about both.
Okay. Yes, I can tell you about that. Give me a moment to pull that up. So when it came to the fear of being robbed and assaulted, or when it came to the police harassment, what we found is that Black and Hispanics were more likely to state that they had been harassed by a police officer than their white counterparts. When it came to fear of being, the other one was, so one was police harassment, the other one was fear of being robbed and assaulted. We saw similar responses between both groups. I don't have the numbers before me right now, but there weren't much differences in regards to fear of being robbed and assaulted between the groups.
Okay. Scanning through the questions here, we're getting a lot of great questions. So for folks in the audience who work for cities or consultants who work with cities, people mostly dealing with infrastructure improvements, how do you recommend integrating these findings about personal safety into city work about infrastructure?
About infrastructure? Well, I think it's pretty clear in terms of there's a myth that, I don't know, I can't say it's a myth, but there's a concern that many people of color do not want a bicycle lane in their street. And you notice on the slides, that was somewhat debunked in that many of them said they would like a bicycle lane on their street. I think the focus too much is on infrastructure, actually. If we're going to focus on infrastructure, I think there's certainly support for protected bicycle lanes. There's also support for a bike share among all groups. But what's not being discussed enough is people's access to power to bring about those changes within municipal government. We saw in the research that in regards to the white respondents, they felt that they were much more optimistic, the whites as well as those making a certain amount of income, that government would invest in their communities, whereas their minorities were not. So I see the focus or the challenges being more associated with the social context than it is about the infrastructure. Because if you have quality infrastructure, there's no proof that people will actually use it if they have fears about their safety or being harassed by police officers or being robbed and assaulted while bicycling. So I think we need to work together with law enforcement. We need to integrate a better focus on crime data as well as crash data to understand where there are hot spots so that we can target this holistically, because it's not just about infrastructure. There are social and cultural factors as well.
That's great, thank you. We've got related questions here about bike lanes in low-income communities and the perception or reality that those bike lanes are often appearing in communities alongside gentrification concerns. So how does your research apply to that, and any light that you can shed on those concerns?
Well, it doesn't. I mean, we don't directly address the question in regards to, gentrification. But what I can state about that is I facilitated a focus group in New York. This focus group was looking at race, place, public space, biking while black in New York. And one of the questions we asked them specifically was, do they think that bike lanes lead to gentrification? That group thought so. But in terms of the research that we did here in New Jersey, we didn't ask that question specifically, so I cannot say that this research is addressing that. But based on the focus groups I've done in New Jersey, outside of this particular research, and in New York and in other places, you do have many people, especially people in low-income minority communities, who feel that bicycle lanes are white lanes, and bicycle lane leads to gentrification.
Great. Could you tell us a little bit about why you decided to do this work and what you hope to look at next?
Well, I did this work because I felt like there was too much focus, number one, on the infrastructure piece and not enough focus on some of the things that I think are of challenge to minority communities. One being the fear of being harassed by police officers, especially in the context of today. Secondly, I didn't feel that the questions or the research that was currently being done were sort of representative of the thoughts that minorities were having. Being a minority, and my co-author James identifies as a Hispanic, I just didn't feel that people were asking the right questions that could actually deal with the problems that were people of color are experiencing in their community. I think the fear of being robbed and assaulted is one example of that. The question regarding access to political power and people's perception regarding whether or not they feel they can bring about change through elected leadership is one that continues to needs to be explored. Another one is around bike clubs. I've once said that if bicycling is the new golf, what are minorities missing by not being a part of bicycle clubs, and why aren't many of them joining bicycle clubs? What is it about these social clubs that they're not joining? We do know that a number are, but what is it as a whole? What are the reasons why they're not? And I think that's something else that needs to be explored further.
Yeah, that's great. We actually have some questions in the question box from the audience here about what would encourage more involvement in biking groups by people of color and by women. So that sounds like a great area for future research.
Yeah, we asked that question in the women's survey, and one response the women gave is that they would like to see more women-led groups. They would like to cycle with other women. So bringing about a group that encourages a sisterhood of cycling. And I know there are a few around the country, but many people, at least some of the people I've interacted with, are not aware of those. So to further promote many of those social clubs that exist for women, I think would be helpful. So that's one way to get it done.
That's great. Some questions are touching on health as part of your findings, that health was a top motivating factor for cyclists of color. And so I'm curious if you have given any thought to how to get health departments more involved and on board with encouraging active transportation.
Oh, absolutely. I think in New Jersey is a great example of that. You stated in my bio how I had done work around or with chronic disease coordinators in New Jersey. That's one way we're educating them about the research findings, as well as about complete streets. So health and transportation in New Jersey is definitely a topic. We're having our Complete Street Summit here in October, and we are inviting members from the health community to be a part of that so that they can learn more about transportation as a whole. I think there's a high level of interest from people in the health field in regards to the built environment and how it impacts people's health. So continuing to share this knowledge with them, making them more aware, as well as making transportation professionals more aware of the health angle, I think is beneficial to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. We're also getting a lot of questions here about bike share, which I think is an important part of your research, especially since you mentioned that there are a lot of concerns about bicycle theft, which bike share can address. And in terms of access to a bicycle, it can be an effective tool. But we know that often that is not the case or is not happening quickly enough. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about access to bike share, and we're getting questions particularly from Portland, Oregon, where the Bike Town for All program includes some outreach, cost reduction, credit card access, but folks are wondering what other elements should be incorporated into that work.
I think the piece that is most often missed is that people do outreach with groups of individuals that do not reflect the demographics of the community they're trying to engage. I think that if you want to convince more people of color to utilize bike share systems, to be a part of it, they need to see themselves in the images that are put forth in regards to these bike share systems. They also need to see members of your outreach team that may or that look like them. People need to speak languages that are representative of the communities that have English as their second language. But one of the biggest problems I see with bike share is the fact that people of color don't feel like it's for them. They have multiple reasons for feeling this way. One is that it's not present in their community most time. And then secondly, as I said, the images that are coming out, save for the Better Bike Share partnership in Philadelphia, who I think is really leading the charge, many of the images don't sort of convey the message that they're all inclusive. So I think we have an image problem when it comes to bike share, and access is certainly an issue because they usually start in the central business district and then work their way out. And communities of color, although they would love to use these systems, don't have the opportunity to benefit from them unless they venture outside their community to gain access. And so placement is an issue with that as well. Also, when it comes to the hiring of staff who are working behind the scenes on these bike share systems, we need to do a better job at hiring people of color to man those as well, so that people could see that there are also economic benefits associated with bike share that benefits their community as a whole, as well as their families.
That's great, really thoughtful response, Charles. Thank you. There are a handful of other questions from Oakland and San Francisco on similar topics about bike share access and equitable bike share. So that's really helpful. Related, we have a question. Someone wants to know your thoughts on the role of formal consultation and engagement practices, both in the public sector and the private sector, as a way of facilitating access to power in communities that you're working with.
Can you repeat that for me?
Yeah, they're wondering about the role of formal consultation or engagement practices, any formal community engagement work, both from the public sector and the private sector, as a way to facilitate access to power in communities that traditionally are not at the table.
Yeah, so going back to what I mentioned about bike share and there not being proper representation by members of the community you're trying to engage, I think that city staff, state staff, and other government organizations and nonprofits are having a challenge because the demographics of their organizations are not do not look like the people they're trying to serve. So being more inclusive and diverse, I think, can remove the first barrier. The second barrier, I think, is that people tend to forget the historical context that created the distrust that exists in communities. If you're trying to engage a community of color, I think it's not wise to believe that they're going to come to you or come to City Hall, et cetera, for a meeting. We need city staff and others who are involved in this work to actually go to them, meet them where they are. We knew that we wanted to get a very representative response from these communities, so we went to 34 different towns and met them on the streets where they were. We knew that's the only way that we would get the response we wanted. We were not going to get that via survey online. We were not going to get it through any other means. If you want to reach these people, you have to go to where they are. Also, in terms of the power piece, that's a very tricky one, but what I usually find is that public transportation decision-making processes happen at City Hall or in other places, but they do not. Let me back up on that one. So what we're usually finding in the public transportation decision-making process is that consultants, et cetera, usually check a box for having done community engagement that only includes a few people from the respective communities, the Black and brown communities. Usually these are the same people over and over again speaking for the masses. So then once a project is installed in the community and there's pushback, many people question why. Well, the reason is because the proper engagement hasn't happened. It has only happened with a small group of individuals they call stakeholders within the community. Also power, if you're going to talk power and equity, power means that a non-person of color more than likely needs to give up a seat at the table so that a person of color can speak and be a part of the decision-making process. It's not enough just to have one person of color present at the table. If you're going to have them at the table, they need to be in a power position, meaning making decisions for respective communities. So it's much more about sharing in the power and allowing this to happen organically by going to the people and letting them tell you what the solutions are.
Absolutely. Someone's asking if you have, for people who want to learn more about this topic, do you have any resources or books that you would recommend to folks?
Well, the webinar is one, Walking Towards Justice. We're going to cover, as I stated, the intersection of mobility with race, class, place, power, and politics. That's one place they could start. Secondly, I think understanding the sort of psyche of people of color is very important. So reading literature on, how people came to be disenfranchised, the history of African Americans in cities, why there's distrust for local government. Many of those books would get at some of the challenges people are having because they would understand why members of these communities are hesitant to come to City Hall, are hesitant to engage with people who don't look like them, are hesitant to embrace bicycling, etc., because it's all from a historical sense. So I think understanding the challenges that these communities have faced, respecting those challenges, and educating oneself around those challenges could help for a more inclusive and diverse system.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to that webinar with America Walks. Would you flip back to that slide so folks can see where to register for that?
Yes.
Thank you. Perfect. A number of folks are also asking about the culture of aspirational car ownership and perceptions of bicycling as related to car ownership. Is that something that you touched on in your research?
No, but I think we asked, yes, we did. We asked that in the focus group, and we got mixed sort of responses to that. People stated that there were some people who stated that, sure, ideally they would love to have a car. There were also some people who stated that perception regarding bicycling is that you may be poor or of less means, so they were much more likely to want a car. But we got mixed reviews from that, but everyone did state for the most part that they wanted a car, but it was for different reasons.
Gotcha. A number of folks are also asking, in your questioning of people as part of this research, did you ask much about trade-offs, both in terms of trade-offs for a bike lane within the street, giving up parking or other trade-offs, or trade-offs about transportation infrastructure and transportation investment as compared with other things in a community?
No, I did not, but I think that would be a great question to ask in future research.
Another clarifying question about the research. Do you have any comparison of police harassment of cyclists as compared with pedestrian statistics?
No, we do not. We only ask bicyclists. We could say that non-bicyclists are considered pedestrians since they had not bicycled within 12 months, but I don't feel comfortable making that comparison to just those who identify as pedestrian and not cyclists. So no, we did not touch on that.
Okay. Let's see. Do you have any thoughts? People are asking about any successes for access to bicycling around schools, specifically for kids or other young people, students. Do you have any thoughts about that?
What is the actual question?
Any strategies or success stories for giving better access around schools?
No, but my colleagues here at the New Jersey Safe Routes to School Resource Center could definitely address that. If they have specific questions, they could reach out to me, and I could put them in contact with my colleagues here who run the New Jersey Safe Routes to School Resource Center. They would be better suited to answer that question.
That's great. Thanks, Charles. I think your research is prompting as many questions as you set out to answer yourself. There's a lot of questions coming in kind of all over the map, so appreciate that. Another one that we're seeing here is about the culture of cycling for immigrant responses and whether you saw any difference between those communities or any findings that you found with those communities.
Yes, we did, and that could have been part 3 of the study, which is where we're going to take a look at the country of origin where people spent the first 12 years of their lives, and we're going to see how their responses differ than those who were born here in America. And as soon as we're able to kind of publish that, I will share it. But as you can see, we touched on a lot of variables in this research. There were so many different moving pieces. We haven't gotten to that yet in terms of actually fully addressing those questions, but we do plan to publish a paper soon that will cover those findings. So please stay tuned.
That's great. Yeah, I think there are probably parts 4, 5, 6, 7. I think you could spend quite a while doing this research, so that's really great. We're getting a clarifying question here about when you asked folks about whether they thought they'd had government support for biking in their communities, did you clarify, or what do you think respondents meant by government support? Was it infrastructure? Was it access to bike share, financial support, other community engagement? Do you get a sense of what government support means to people?
Yeah, so it was clear. Maybe I went through that one too fast, but we asked in terms of government support and investment. The question was, how likely, or let me go back to that slide. We asked, do your local government currently supports and invests in active transportation? And the majority stated that they do not feel that the government currently supports and invests in cycling infrastructure. So support is a bit vague, investment not so much, but that's the way the question was worded. In hindsight, it could have been more specific, but that's the way we worded the question at the time.
And a few people are asking about any distinctions between cycling for transportation and cycling for recreation. Is that a nuance that you were able to capture?
No, but one of the ways we got at that was we asked people their reasons for cycling, and when they cycling, why do they cycle? So you see here on this particular slide that the reason for cycling was for health and for fun. What I did not include was another slide we have which got at, okay, why, what was the actual, where were they going, or what was the purpose behind the cycling? And then I'm trying to grab my paper without making noises in the background, but most people still stated that they were bicycling for exercise. Few people stated that they bicycled to, oh, I have it here. So we asked them how often they bicycled for a particular reason, with their options ranging from very often to never for a specific purpose. The largest proportion of respondents bicycle most often for exercise or leisure. That's around 48%. Also, around 37% stated that they bicycle for running errands. I should state that they could check more than one option here, and also to visit friends and family. So the top three reasons for bicycling were for exercise or leisure, for running errands, and to visit family and friends. What was surprising is that 55% of them stated that they never bicycle to go to work. 54% stated they never bicycle for work. 63% stated they never bicycle to go to school, and 59% stated that they never go to they never bicycle to catch the train or to a bus stop. So it still goes back to using the bicycle around exercise and leisure and for fun, and less so about going to work, for work, school, or using it in a multimodal way.
Gotcha. That's really interesting. Great. Yeah, as I mentioned, we've got a lot of questions here, and more than we'll be able to get to with the remaining time. But looking ahead to the next chapter of your research, Charles, I was wondering if you could give us a little teaser. A few people are asking about whether there are any unique barriers to cycling for women or differences in the top barriers as compared to men. I know that's the next part of your research, but wondering if you can give us any top-level findings from that.
Well, so it's important to note in that study that we did not compare the responses of women to men at all. What we compared were the responses of people of color, of women of color to non-women of color. The biggest concern that we saw was around safety, and it was personal safety. One of the quotes from that study is that a woman in Camden, New Jersey, said that I live in a jail. I do not go outside. The moment I get home, I lock my doors, I shut off the lights, and we do not step foot outside to do anything for fear of being robbed and assaulted, whether walking, cycling, or otherwise. We also learned that in dealing with this fear of safety, women were, there are certain ways they position keys in their hands to fight off a potential aggressor. So the differences that they're going to see in that research are not in response to men, but in response to Black women and Hispanic women versus white women who have much more means in terms of income. So that's the focus of that study. And it's not quantitative, it's qualitative. So it's a summary of focus group. People can read about the results of that study now at www.njbikeped.org. That's njbikeped.org. That study, the report, is actually online now, so they could take a look at that.
That's great. We'll be sending out the slides and the recording, as well as links to Charles's research after the webinar, so that folks can dive in and take a deeper look, because it's clear that people have a lot of questions about how to interpret this data and how to apply it to the work that they're doing. So thank you, Charles, for shedding light on this. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch that you weren't able to cover yet, or any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave everyone with?
No, I would like to thank NACTO for doing this, and I would like to thank everyone who attended the webinar today, participated in the webinar. Thank you for your many, many questions, and you have my contact information that is shown here. I would like to put that back up one last time. Feel free to call, email, or contact me via Twitter about the survey findings, or in regards to any other research that I'm currently doing with my colleagues here at Rutgers.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Charles, for taking the time to share these findings with us, and thanks to everyone who joined us today for all of your great questions. Like I said, more than we were able to get to, but a lot of really interesting questions and a lot of interesting ideas for additional research on this topic. So I think it's clear that there's a lot of work still to be done. So thank you, everyone. Check back in on NACTO's website for future webinars, and we'll be sharing some follow-up resources via email, so look out for that. All right, thanks. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks.